Hi guys, Gabi from UiPath Hacks here. In the last 2 months, I struggled a lot to try to figure out how to use SAP BAPIs in UiPath. It was a long and bumpy road, and I was surprised not to be able to find all the needed information together in one place. Actually, it was this experience that pushed me to create this channel, to share especially these types of information that are not, at this moment at least, well documented end to end. To make this work, I talked with SAP authorization consultants, with the BAP experts and UiPath experts, and now that I've managed to put everything together, I would like to share with you the solution and bring together all the pieces of the puzzle required to run the BAPI goods movement create in UiPath. And this should give a very good basis for running any other SAP BAPIs in UiPath, and I will have some words on that to the end of this video. So what is a BAPI? BAPI stands for Business Application Programming Interface and is a standard interface to the business object models in SAP. They are the primary method through which third-party applications interact with SAP, and a BAPI wraps the internal layers of SAP's business object model to ensure that all business logic, validations, and authorization checks are executed properly when accessing or changing these objects. So let's go through the user guide of running the BAPI goods movement create with UiPath just after this short announcement.
Hey guys, if you are new here, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so you won't miss out on future content. Thanks!
So I would like to go now through the BAPI goods movement create complete user guide. I would like to talk about the prerequisites that are needed to run a BAPI in UiPath. I will provide an overview of the BAPI goods movement create. I will then just present quickly the workflow steps, and I will do it also live in the UiPath Studio. And then I have listed a number of errors and solutions that I've run into in my trial and error tests, and then some useful links that I found online that helped me figure this out. So as prerequisites, I have some SAP prerequisites on the authorization side. The SAP user running the BAPI from UiPath would need an authorization for a RFC metadata get function module, as well as for the BAPI goods movement create function module, and for the BAPI transaction commit function module. I will explain why we need this as well. And of course, in this case, the SAP user would need to have the MM and warehousing authorization as well, just to be able to post goods receipt in general in SAP. On the UiPath side, you need to install the SAP connector for Microsoft, and it requires the Microsoft C++ runtime version 10. You need to install the BAPI activities pack in Studio in the managed packages. And to get the return object BAP ready2 to work, you have to import in the imports tab the two entries that you see in this presentation. This BAPI read2 object is the object which contains the message or the messages, in this case a list of BAPI read2 objects, the messages that the BAPI returns after the run if there are any kind of issues. Moving on to the overview of the BAPI goods movement create. You can use this BAPI to post the goods receipts, and it will create a material document. For that reason, in SAP, you can only create one material document each time you call up the BAPI. So you can't post at once 10 material documents. You'll post one for each run, and you will just run the BAPI create movement in a loop in this case, or if you get your data from a queue, for each queue item you would run the BAPI once and then take the next queue item and run it again, and so on. So there are some in arguments for the BAPI. So what the BAPI expects to get as input data. There is a good movements underscore code. This expects a data row with one column with this header, gm underscore code, with a 2 digits codification of the type of goods receipt. In the case of goods receipt for purchase order, the code is 01. The goods movement underscore header expects a data row with 3 columns, the posting date, the document date, and the reference document number. And there are some specific formats that the date has to have. The goods movement underscore item expects a data table with at least or some of these mandatory columns. Material is not mandatory, but usually it could be useful. The plant, the storage location, movement type, entry, quantity. So basically the quantity and the unit of measure, the purchase order number, the purchase order item, and the movement indicator, which is B in the case of goods receipt for purchase order. So that's kind of fixed if you want to receive goods against the purchase order. So these were the in arguments. Now for the out arguments, what we get back from the BAPI, we get back a data row called goods movement underscore header red. It contains the material document number and year if the posting was successful. For whatever reason, we get the same information in 2 strings as well, in mat document year and material document. And then what is most important probably is the return argument, which will provide a list of BAPI red 2 objects that would contain 1 item for each message returned by the BAPI. If there are no errors after the BAPI run, then this list will be empty. And what is important, this might differ based on the system settings, but in my case, after I ran the BAPI goods movement create, I got no error, but nothing happened, no posting was made in the system. And that's because I didn't run the BAPI transaction commit. So either you have to run this BAPI after the goods movement create BAPI to kind of save or commit the changes to the database, or I've just read online that there is also some OSS note that could be implemented. But in my case, this worked perfectly. So I just ran the BAPI goods movement create and then the BAPI transaction commit, and that saved the data that the BAPI was trying to post. So now for the UiPath workflow steps, I have just shown here an overview of what I did in the workflow in the studio, and I will also show the workflow in the studio briefly to complete the picture. Basically, just high level, I needed to initialize the arguments needed for the BAPI. So I built a data table and then I did a data row, or extracted the data row from the data table. In this case, it was hard-coded. It was 01, what the BAPI was expecting. Then for the goods movement header, I built a data table and added a row with the posting date, document date, and reference document number. And for the goods movement item, I've built a data table and then added a few rows with the information below. There are some interesting format specifics which must be adhered to. So if, for example, you want to put in a material number and the material number has just 8 characters, then you need to use preceding zeros to reach the number of 18 expected characters. So if the material number has 8 characters, you have to put 10 preceding zeros just to have the 18 characters, and this way the BAPI will recognize your material. Same for purchase order. If the purchase order has, for example, 8 digits in your system, the number range for the purchase order, then to get the expected 10 characters, you have to concatenate 2 zeros at the beginning of the purchase order number so that you get the expected 10 characters, and the BAPI would accept your entry. So basically I've prepared and initialized, I've created data tables and data rows for these arguments. And then a few words on connecting to SAP. So the BAPI would be wrapped by a SAP application scope, and this needs to be configured. This has a configuration window that you can see here, and there are two ways to connect to SAP. One way is with using a user and a password, and in this case you have to fill in the application server, the system number, the system ID, the client, the username and the password, and you get most of this information from the properties of your SAP connection in the SAP GUI. Or you can use the single sign-on option, and then you'd have to again give the application server, system number, system ID. I think I've given also the message server, the same as the application server, the client's code, and then you have to specify you want to use SNC, and then you have to have a SNC partner name and some settings around the logon and the security level, which you can also find in the properties of your SAP connection in SAP GUI. It was a bit tricky to figure out the SNC partner name. If you have something like P dots and something afterwards, make sure that you put the P and the two dots as well in the SNC partner name. Otherwise it will not work. At least it didn't work in my case. And what is interesting is that after you have basically filled in this this configuration panel for the SAP application scope, you actually have to fill in the properties here on the right hand panel as well, because this is actually what is being used by UiPath to connect to SAP, and whatever you put here is only to allow you to access the BAPIs in the studio and to configure them, but at runtime this is what will be taken into consideration. Yeah, and one detail, you have to use the quotation marks here in this properties panel, whereas you don't need to do that in the configuration screen here. So moving on, after you have configured the SAP application scope, you can then call an invoke or use an invoke BAPI activity. You give the BAPI name in the header, in my case BAPI goods MVT create, and then you get here the arguments or the parameters of the BAPI, the direction and the data types expected. And basically all the data rows and tables and strings that I've prepared at the beginning, I've put them here as values. This is the BAPI movement create, and below is the BAPI transaction commit, which only has one return argument, just a message after the run if there was any issue with committing the values to the data to the tables. And that's pretty much it. And then to really figure out what happened after the BAPI run, you should look at the list of BAPI red2 objects returned by the BAPI. So here I'm just showing how I was iterating through the list of BAPI red2 objects and displaying the message, the item message, and the type, item, and number of the message. And just don't forget, when you create a for each loop, don't forget to update the type argument to the BAPI red2 object. Here is the structure of the BAPI red2 objects. So you have basically a type, an ID, and a number, which could help you understand what kind of error or what kind of message it is. But the most important field, I think, is the message label, where you get the actual message returned by SAP through the BAPI. So for some errors and solutions that I've run into during my testing around authorization area, so if you get something like no RFC authorization for function module, then you need to ask your SAP authorization guy to provide these authorizations for the user that you are testing with. In my case, there were 3 function modules that I needed to have authorization to. Then I struggled a bit to get the right column names because I had to really use the ones that I've provided on the slides 4 to 6. So for example, something like PSTA_ING_date or doc_date. And these codifications of the columns you can get from some ABAP expert who can tell you how the BAPI structure looks like and what it expects. So just take care how you name your column headers here in the data tables. And then I had one issue saying that material was not maintained in this plant, and actually the material was there. It was maintained fully, but the issue was that I wasn't using the leading zeros here before the material number. Another a bit confusing error message was update control of movement type is incorrect. And there I just had to set the movement indicator to B, which means goods receipt for purchase order. But the message wasn't really pointing me into that direction. Then something like no goods receipt possible for purchase order and so on. And the item number and the purchase order was open, but the issue was just that I was missing the 2 leading zeros and didn't have the 10 characters, but only 8 characters in the PO number. Then just take care about what unit of measure code you're using. So if you want to say piece, it might be that you need to use ST rather than piece as a code for the unit of measure. And yeah, then in the beginning I forgot to update the type argument for the BAPI ret2 list of objects when trying to loop through it with the for each activity. So just don't forget to update the type argument to the BAPI ret2 object rather than the default setting. And then if you get no errors at the end, but nothing happens, try to run the BAPI transaction commit BAPI, and that should save the results to the database table. And in the end, I've posted some useful links, something that helped me quite a lot. A link with the details on the BAPI goods movement create, a list with all the fields that must be filled in for this BAPI, an explanation of the BAPI ret2 object. I found some good common reusable components for SAP on the marketplace in UiPath. It had some templates for different BAPIs, so I found it useful to look at some of them and try to understand how they've built it and what I need to do to build mine. And there's also one BAPI example for this user get details and some general installation instructions that you can find on the UiPath forum link below, which is also useful to figure out what I need to install on the UiPath side especially. So this was pretty much the complete user guide for running BAPI goods movement create with UiPath. I will switch quickly to the actual workflow in Studio, and I'll just show you very quickly how I'm doing it here. I'm basically preparing all the data that I will need for the BAPI. So I'm building a database table with this column header. In this case, and in this example, I'm hard coding a lot. It's just a dummy example, let's say. So I'm just hard coding the 01 here, and then I'm taking the first row of the data table into a data row because I'm expected to provide a data row to the BAPI for the movement code. I'm doing a similar thing for the movement header. I have a table with 3 columns this time, the posting date, document date, and reference document number. Again, because this is a quick test, I was just hard coding everything, and then I'm pulling the first row from this data table. So data table with position number 0. And then for the items, I am building the data table and just again hard coding 2 rows. And then I'm just outputting it for debugging reasons. And then I'm also preparing a data table for the output of the BAPI that should give me the material document and the material document year. I've just put some dummy values here to have a data row. And then I'm getting the credential from Orchestrator for the user and password with which I am connecting to SAP. And in the SAP application scope, I have the BAPI goods movement create and the BAPI transaction commit, BAPI calls. So basically just an invoke SAP BAPI activity. Because in this environment where I'm recording this video, I'm not connected to the SAP system. I will just show some screenshots of how the BAPI settings look like for goods movement create. So we see here the output arguments for the material document number and year as a data row and as strings as well. For the in direction, we have the good movements code, the good movements header, and the good movements item. And then we have the list of BAPI ret2 objects as an in-out argument. Basically, we will get here all the messages from the BAPI in case there are any. And for the BAPI transaction commit, we just have a return argument which contains a BAPI ret2 object. So this was it for the complete user guide of running BAPI goods movement create in UiPath. If you want to run a different BAPI, most of what has been said in this video still applies. The only piece that would differ is getting authorization for that particular BAPI and getting the expected fields from that BAPI, either from an internet resource or from an ABAP consultant. If you want to receive a copy of the presentation in this video, please leave a comment below. And if you have experience with BAPIs and would like to add anything to this video, please do so in the comment section below as well. Thank you and see you next time. Hey, if you are getting value out of this video, could you please hit the like button? Thanks.